All right, we are live now for a conversation I am so excited about. This is AAAIP's first ever live, and who better to have it with than Dr. Aubrey Fine? I'm going to introduce you in just a moment, but first I'm going to chatter on for a moment to allow our friends to join us. I know you are who they want to hear from, so I will go ahead and start some introductions. My name is Dr. Taylor Chastain Griffin. I am the Executive Director of AAAIP and the National Director of AAI Advancement at Pet Partners. And this conversation for me really is, I wrote on my personal Facebook page earlier, just a dream come true. When I was in grad school learning how to become a mental health counselor, I had your textbook, and you have no idea how many times I would just sit there reading it and reading other things that you've done and say, if I could just have a conversation with this man. And now that I have, it's far exceeded my expectations. You are just such a great hero and leader for this field. So it's such an honor to have you here today. As we have our friends joining us, I want you to let me know where you're joining us from. If you are a member of AAAIP and have a vocation that you represent, mental health, OT educators, let us know. If you're a therapy animal handler, we want to hear it. So this is a conversation today, and you're going to be invited to ask Dr. Fine some questions. So go ahead and tell us hello. I see a hello from Colleen from Texas. Hi, Colleen. So we know everything is working well. Please do put something in the chat so we know that you're here. And I am now going to introduce Dr. Fine, though I think you might need no introduction. He received his graduate degree from University of Cincinnati in 1982, and Dr. Fine opened his practice in 1987, so you've been at this for a while. His practice specializes in treating children with ADHD, learning disabilities, developmental disorders, and parent-child relations. Dr. Fine is the author of several books, including the Handbook on Animal-Assisted Therapy that I just talked about. It's always on my desk. And he has a very long relationship with Pet Partners. He served as the chair of Pet Partners Human Animal Bond Advisory Board and was one of the content experts who assisted at all stages of developing AAAIP and the Animal Assisted Intervention Specialist certification exam. So has led us in thought and all along the way. So many hellos coming in. So a lot of people here excited to see you. Thanks so much, Aubrey, for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so I want to start out today. I've heard this, I've actually been asked this before about you. And so, if you could tell us just how you got started in this field, specifically working and bringing therapy animals into your practice.
You know, I'm often asked that question, and I always start this off by saying that I was a person growing up without any pets. I never had an animal in my life,
Wow.
and my mom didn't like animals, and in fact, she was afraid of them. So, who would have thought that at one point in my life, my whole world would have changed? So, it actually goes back to 1973. This is all serendipitous and accidental. Um, my first pet was a little gerbil, and I actually it was a mouse at first. And when I brought the mouse home, remember my mom didn't like animals, and I brought the mouse in. She goes, "Oh, that's a rat!" And she started screaming, and she was pretty anxious about the whole ordeal. And so I went back to the place that I got the mouse and said, "Listen, I don't want my money back. I'm going to keep the cage. Why don't you just hold on to the mouse a little bit, and I'll get my mother calm, and I'll come back and get her." And when I went back to get the mouse, as I was walking towards the mouse section, I saw this little gerbil. I went, wow, a little bit bigger and really sweet. And so she became my first pet. So to answer your question, at that time I was a student in Montreal, and I had been working on a social skill based program for kids with learning disabilities. Again, in those days, learning disabilities was a broad term. Children could have had ADHD, high functioning autism, um, learning disorders as well. And by that time, I had Sasha for about a year, and I decided in the cold of Canadian winter to bring Sasha to the program just as a share, a meet and greet with kids. Had no intentions, never heard of this field. I just wanted to share my little buddy with her, with the group. And so I remember coming to the program and had her in the cage, and kids started wandering towards me. I was the director of that program, and kids came to me and said, well, tell me, what kind of animal is that? And then some kids said, why are you bringing her? But one boy was really insistent after I explained it was a gerbil, before I even really got into the door to do sharing with lots of kids. he said, "Can I hold her before the program starts?" And today, we'll just call him Stephen. Stephen today would have been diagnosed with ADHD, the combined subtype,
Mm.
very, very impulsive youngster. And so I said to Stephen, you know what? I agree. I'll share her with you, but let's go sit down in the little corner here. And what we're going to do is I'm going to get you to sit with your legs crossed. And then I'm going to get you to put your palms. I'm going to move my camera for a second. I'm going to get you to put your palms right about here. And then I said to him, um, I'm going to put her in your palms, but you have to promise me you won't move because I want my little friend to be comfortable. And I told him her name was Sasha. And he looked at me and said he would. So after a few moments, there it was. I gave Sasha to the little boy. And as she became more comfortable, she started to meander on his tummy, then back into his palms. And I still remember this is 73. So we're looking at many, many years ago. That this transpired almost 50 years ago. And all I can tell you is I don't remember all the words that were said, but I saw this boy beaming at me with pride in his eyes, saying, "You see, I promised you I won't move."
Wow.
And so that was a serendipitous moment that really changed my life. And who would have thought that close to 50 years later, I would have worked with so many species. And in fact, I just wrote a chapter for a fun book, I call it, and it was called All Creatures Great and Small. And so she was my beginning and she was my small. And
Mm.
later on today, maybe the folks will see one of my larger friends, and her name is Amber, and she's an Arabian horse.
Yeah.
So that's how that whole story began. There was no field. I had no idea what I was doing. Again, you have to look at Boris Levinson's work in the 60s, late 50s, but really becoming a little bit more prevalent or at least outspoken in the 60s. Um, and so I had not read books on this subject. I knew nothing about what I was about to embark on. And yet that serendipitous moment changed my entire life. And I've worked alongside animals for like those 48, 49 years already.
Well, it not only changed your life, and I'm sure the life of many animals and many clients, but a life of so many people who are joining us here today. We have many people saying that they follow your work and really appreciate what you've done to make this field accessible for all of us. I know everyone joining us can relate to those stories of watching the amazing things that happen when we introduce animals, whether it be to clients or to people who are visiting with on volunteer visits, or even just in our personal lives. So please comment about a similar story if you have one. People go back and read these comments. These lives are available, and the stories that are shared are really referenced. So share your stories, and we'd love to see them. You've talked a little bit about your animal, great and small. I want to hear more about your therapy animals, and I think we have some pictures to share. So tell me about some of the therapy animals either you've worked with in those 50 years or that you work with now, whatever you'd like to share about them.
You know, it's a good question. Over the years, I started off, as I just mentioned, with a little gerbil. And then early in my career, I primarily used smaller animals like rabbits and guinea pigs. And then I began to work with birds. And so over the years, over the years, I've had cockatoos and cockatiels and lovebirds and conures. In fact, I have a wonderful story down the road if you're interested about a boy that adopted one of the conures that had high functioning autism, and the the tremendous impact that that bird had on him. And Boomer is still alive. He's had that bird for 25
Wow.
years. So, but I've had birds, and then of course many, many, many dogs. And the hardest part about having therapy animals is sometimes having to say goodbye to them.
Hmm.
And over the years, I've had many golden retrievers. Here on the screen, you see Magic, who is the name of a scholarship that we have with Pet Partners, the
Yes.
Magic Scholarship for people that are interested in studying human animal bond. My first therapy dog was a dog named Puppy. Um, um, we adopted her, and Puppy was a golden retriever that, in many ways, truly impacted the lives of so many. All my dogs have impacted the lives of many, just like many of the people listening here. Uh, Puppy was remarkable. I have pictures of her that we're not going to see today, but that when she would sit there with her arms, her paws crossed, she almost looked like Carl Rogers with with her paws crossed. I actually wrote a book about her that was called Afternoons with Puppy, and really Afternoons with Puppy is more of a metaphor of afternoons spending time with therapy animals, working with children, because the morning time is mainly where I would be working at the university with college students. But many afternoons I would be with the various animals. So we've had many dogs. Magic was one, and today I have two dogs, Ketsi and Mystic. Um, Actually, that's them right there to my right. Um, Ketsi is now 11, and Mystic is just about to turn 4. Um, and I've also had bearded dragons and fish tanks. So just a wide array of animals. I used to always call this the Baskin Robbins approach, because not all my animals are everyone's favorite,
Mhm.
but one animal is someone's favorite. So children have always learned to enjoy different qualities of different therapy animals. And so again, each of them brings a certain presence, a different form of majesticness
Mhm.
into the work. And they all have their personalities. You know what I mean? Some are more passionate, some are more funny, but in essence, they make the connection, and it's the connections that work together.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to talk more about AAAIP and the certification exam here shortly. But one of the things that we're commonly asked when people are getting started in this field or interested in this field is, they'll say, I've read about therapy animals, I know about the definition and the idea, but I don't always know exactly what it looks like to bring an animal into a professional practice. So, what are some of the things that you do with these animals and your clients to reach your professional treatment goals?
It's a good question, and maybe I'll take it back a little bit, because for some of the people that may be new to this work, I want to compliment you all in taking on this endeavor, because when I think about when I began my work, um, I had very little resources to go to. Many people didn't know what I was doing, just like Boris Levinson, that had chuckles when he gave his first talk at the American Psychological Association. I remember early on in doing my work, people really didn't understand what I was doing. In fact, in the city that I'm in Southern California, when I'd be walking the therapy dog, and sometimes in the olden days when I had the birds, we'd all be taking walks together with some of the kids, and people just thought of me as the animal guy. Um, but it's a lot of work, and I want to share that with you, that you have to be good to yourself. You have to be one. Skilled in the profession you are. So if you're a psychologist, a nurse, an occupational therapist, physical therapist, speech and language therapist, you have to have that skill set grounded.
Mhm.
But as a complementary form of therapy, which is what I believe animal assisted interventions are, you then need to be able to interact comfortably working alongside a therapy animal. So I always call it like a dance. And I
Mhm.
use the example of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Not that I look like Fred Astaire, not that I dance like Fred Astaire, um, but I've learned to work with animals seamlessly. You have to be very comfortable in sharing the platform. You have to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And we can talk about examples if the people here are interested in that. But I also think what I learned very quickly. Okay, so I talked about Sasha almost 49 years ago. The reality is, when I began working with children, and I only work with kids, I always wanted to think of ways that I can make connections with kids. So I have lots of other techniques that I use, like I'm a professional magician, and I use magic to connect with kids. But I learned very quickly, um, as early as I started interacting with Sasha, with kids, that it was my moral and ethical responsibility to make sure that my animals' well-being was there. So they're not tricks, they're not gimmicks,
Mhm.
they're beings that bring a presence to an office. So early on in my work, if you're asking questions, you know, um, of course, the early work of using the animals as a social lubricant,
Mhm.
getting the engagement. What was it like when Puppy was alive and she would greet the patients at the door? She was probably the best, first of all, the best receptionist anyone could ever have. She made sure you were really comfortable, and would greet you with that non-threatening, unconditional love presence. It's like that the cold nose and the warm heart of a golden retriever that gleams that joy. Um, but you have to know how to go beyond that. And so over the years, in my experience, I've learned many other ways to integrate therapy animals into my practice. But I again go back in time and truly say that, as interested as I am about the well-being of my patients, which is in many ways the primary reason why people are coming here, I assure the safety, the well-being, and the breaks for the animals that I work with. And I've done that for all of the years. And so I remember early on in the field when I started to write about ethical issues of animal welfare. Again, I'm not an animal person, right? In theory, I am a human psychologist. But but I think the reason my animals are really comfortable when they come to a place called work here is that they know they're really safe.
Yeah.
They get breaks, they get walked, they get all the good things that we're talking about, and are definitely evident.
Yeah.
But they trust me, and that's where that seamlessness occurs.
That's what really empowers you to work with your animals, and that's a core mission at the heart of AAAIP. We talk about safe and ethical work with our animals, and even realizing that a lot of people who practice with animals are doing so completely well intentioned, but there are steps to take. As a dog trainer myself, it's a big passion of mine when we think about how to balance things like training our animals, but not overtraining to them to the point where we can't see their affiliative behavior or their preferences. We have a course on that available now. We have a course on animal welfare and well-being in AAI. We'll put the links to those in the chat. And if you're a member of AAAIP, you get some really great discounts on that coursework. That was help Dr. Fine helped us create those and was a subject matter expert for those. So if this is topic that's of interest to you, be sure to check that out. I do see also some questions coming in. I'm going to make sure to bring those up here in just a moment after we finish asking Dr. Fine some of the questions we have. We're going to take questions from the audience. So please do put those in the chat. Um, and so, talking about AAAIP, I want to know why you think it's so important that the field comes together. This is something that you've been saying for a long time. There needs to be an association like this. So, talk to us about the importance here of this association.
You know, it, the notion of coming together is a great term, Taylor. I think the field, although it's considered young in its growth, it's been around for a long time, but we have not really mastered the area of professionalism. And I think that what I have tried to talk about in the Handbook on Animal Assisted Therapy for so many years. That book came out originally in 2000, and now it's in its fifth edition. In that book, we have a couple of chapters that really look at where the field needs to go. So we could talk about, of course, the need for more evidence-based treatments and more scientific evidence that demonstrates the efficacy of this field. Because again, early on in the years when I began the work, a lot of the credibility of the field was more anecdotal, less research oriented. On the other hand, we we need to realize that people that do this work, especially those that are doing it professionally, that are integrating animals in therapeutic practices, we need to be sure that there's a level of competency. So again, you are certified in your own area of training,
Mhm.
but how do you learn how to do this better? And it's not only how do you learn to uh, understand how you integrate animals effectively and fairly in your work, but how to then do you also understand the animal well-being, the animal welfare part, the zoonotic concerns, so
Yes.
that all of this is safe. So there was always a need for an organization like this,
Mhm.
because we need one ambassadors, advocates that say that animal assisted interventions are valuable contributions.
Mhm.
We need organizations such as this to help demystify animal assisted interventions, because I think a lot of people, when they see uh, animals working alongside with me, they sometimes anthropomorphize the
Mhm.
process. But I really want them to understand that this is not easy work for all the beings that are involved,
Right.
human and animals together. I think that having a community, which is when that's what I was trying to focus on the most when you said bringing us together, having a community that allows people to talk with each other, to learn from each other. Because I learned a long time ago, know what you know and
Mhm.
know what you don't know, but you surround yourself with people that can be supportive to you.
Yep.
So over the years, when I didn't know things early in my career, even today, I call people and
Mhm.
say, tell me about bird behavior. Tell me about these better ways of working. The other side to this is having organizations gives voice to this field.
Yeah.
And I think that that's important. So there's lots of variability here that's important, but it also looks at competency. And
Mhm.
so we talked about the exam. Again, my concern is that I want people to feel comfortable in the work that they do, and to have that level of strength.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we are really hoping to build everything that you said into our association. We want this to be a place. We have an online community. We encourage people to come in, talk about what's going on. You have people who do this kind of work. You can share stories, ask for feedback. We have courses on all of the topics that we've talked about today, even on infection prevention and zoonosis. And we believe that you need to be a lifelong learner in this field. I've worked with dogs professionally for 10 years, and as it's well known, I live with many, many dogs, and I say I think I know less now than I thought I knew in the beginning. I realize every day how complex these beings are, and how much there is to learn. So that's what we're here for. And many people saying too in the chat that they had to kind of forge their own way and learning how to get started, and we can't even imagine compared to what you had to do when you got started. But that's what we're here for. Um, I do want to turn to some of the questions that have come in. I saw one that came in from Carla, who is a PhD student working on her dissertation and wanting to know what you think about in terms of topics that would be good for her to continue to research and how to contribute to the field. What are some gaps that researchers or students can help us identify?
That's a good question, and I think, I always say that where the heart is, you'll find the treasure. You have to be passionate about a certain subject. So, one, animal assisted interventions is such a broad topic. So, first thing that I would ask is, so what's a population that you're interested in, rather than filling in a gap? So, if you're
Mhm.
interested in children, like say with ADHD or autism, or the elderly, or persons with PTSD, veterans, people that have eating disorders. So let's clarify what your interest is in a special population. But I think if you're starting to do research, what the field really needs is quality research,
Mhm.
a research that has randomized controlled trials, or research that good qualitative research
Mhm.
that uses best practices. I think, one of the comments that a colleague of mine once said is that we have some studies that are out there that have made some very strong points. So replicating research is not bad either to demonstrate its efficacy. But listening to the pipeline, I definitely feel that you should engage in research that looks at what you're interested in,
Mhm.
but then develop a best practice approach if you're looking at the practice side. Because some people are not as interested in treatment outcomes, but they're interested in looking at mechanisms. So,
Right.
people are looking at, for example, in one of the studies that we did on animal welfare, we developed a whole treatment program, but the program wasn't what we studied.
Mhm.
All we did is study the dogs.
Right.
We spent the whole summer watching therapy dogs and looking at what this process did to their level of stressors if there was any. And I have to say that because we built a program that I felt was really safe for everyone, of course that's going to influence the outcomes that we find, because the dogs didn't demonstrate many changes in their behaviors. They were all very comfortable, but we built in that best practice. So I
Right.
think looking at best practices is really important.
That makes sense, and it leads right into, I've seen actually a couple questions come in. There are some people in the audience who want to know what you do specifically to help your animals de-stress, and maybe even talking a little bit about that work to rest ratio that you try to put in with your animals when they're with you in
Yeah.
practice.
Well, it's a good question because I sort of do this a little bit differently. Um, it, in my office, I had one whole room that was almost like a break room, and it
Mhm,
wasn't a break room for me; it was a break room for them. So my animals always have the freedom to leave situations.
mhm,
They can go on a porch and lie down there. They can go sit in another room. So I sort of really watch their level of engagement. They get a lot of chances of breaks.
mhm,
They get driven back and forth from my house. They get walked um, a healthy amount. Lots of people like to give animals treats, so we balance their nutrition so
mhm,
they don't look pudgy like me. But they have an appropriate diet. So I think it's really important when you build this practice, you have to realize that animals do need um, uh, the breaks. And because I had many therapy animals, they take turns coming, they take
mhm,
turns spending time. Um, and sometimes I'm very mindful of certain kids may like more one animal than another. And so I make sure that certain animals come at times when uh, they may be more needed than others.
mhm,
But I think it's important to recognize this. And some people don't have the luxury of having many animals because in the olden days, if I can go back olden days, not 50 years ago, but 20 years ago, I would have four therapy dogs. I had several birds. The bearded dragon was always here. The fish tanks were always here,
mhm.
and so they took turns,
Right.
and so that made it easier for them. It's a funny comment when I say this. Years ago, and I had mentioned Puppy. Um, when Puppy got a bit older, I knew that I needed to retire her, and that's it's funny. You think of this being a logical concept for so many
Mhm,
people to understand, but this was not a popular topic in this world. So I remember I retired Puppy. I thought it would be great, and in fact, there was a little story in the LA Times about Puppy going to be retired, which is kind of a tribute to the therapy dog. But I remember when I retired her, we had a party, and then we were going to um, have her stay home, and the younger dog was going to take over. Um, but I remember my wife calling me and said, "You have to come home." And I said, "What do you mean I have to come home?" And she said, "Puppy hasn't left the door." So we figured out a way to retire her like humans,
Right.
with that level of dignity. And so I set up a special place in another office when she got tired and she wanted to take a nap. I closed the lights out. Kids knew that you wouldn't interrupt her, but I always used to giggle because when she woke up, it was like, "I'm here now." And then she'd look at the younger dog and say, "Listen, whippersnapper, I'm here now, and I'll show you how to do this."
That's cute.
So I think the point that I'm bringing out, and I didn't really want to be tongue in cheek or only be cute, but to really appreciate the fact that doing this work is something that the animals maybe didn't sign up for at first.
Mhm,
But one of the challenges that I've often thought about is therapy animals are very unique animals
mhm,
because we talk about affiliative behavior and reliable and consistent behavior. But on the other hand, you're really looking at animals that are so used to human interaction
mhm.
that when they don't have it, is that stressful for them too?
Yeah.
So again, thinking about all of these issues becomes complicated. So I started writing about retirement 20 something years ago, maybe even longer.
Mhm,
And I think, again, when you talk about ethics, the whole notion of thinking this all through, and making sure that you're doing the best you can for all that are involved is what's important.
Yep, absolutely. And it's something that we want at AAAIP to make more available to people because we talk about this, we can learn so much. But, when you talk about day to day practice, what does that look like? So, in our resource library, we have charts that you can download that help you monitor your animal's behavior. They are all informed by what Dr. Fine has written about retirement and quality of life for animals. So, we have really tangible guidelines that can help you learn how to be the best advocate for your animal. And it's not just important, of course, because we want our animals to be happy, but you look at a liability standpoint, and a stressed out animal is not an animal we want in practice with us. So all of those resources are available. And I was thinking as you were talking, Dr. Fine, that I also had many animals so that I could practice with them. But I know there's a lot of professionals who don't have a therapy animal, have an animal who maybe is not a great fit. So I do want to make sure we plug the fact that we have thousands of volunteer teams at Pet Partners. And so if you are a professional and you're looking for an animal to bring into practice, then you can partner with our volunteer teams where appropriate and bring them in and still benefit from this awesome intervention. So anybody else that has questions, please put them in. I'm going to ask our last question, so I'll be on the lookout for those. But I want to talk about, you've been in the field for a long time, and we're so fortunate at Pet Partners and AAAIP to have experts on our advisory board who really have led the field. So, what can people who have a lot of experience and expertise do to help people who are new to the field?
Again, a good question. Taylor's doing good questions today. I think that one of the roles that all people should have is becoming mentors,
Mhm,
and to recognize that in so many ways we learn from each other. And I think it's the nicest part about having uh, been around for a while is to realize that at some point in time you have to take the baton and pass it on. And so my excitement for the field is even the conversation that we're having today.
mhm,
10 years ago, um, uh, I would have wished we would have had the conversation then, but
mhm,
we didn't. You know what I mean? There wasn't an organization like this. People weren't as passionate to elevate the status of a multidisciplinary
mhm,
approach, um, uh, incorporating animals in working with humans. I think it's important that um, as people become more mature and have things to say, share them. But I also want the younger generation, if we could use that word, younger doesn't mean younger in age, but younger in experience, to realize that you have your wisdom, you have your insights. I always like the quote that Steve Jobs says and said, and I've used it many times, connecting the dots backwards.
mhm,
And so for me, connecting my dots it has been a fun experience, because when I think about it, I always wonder if I didn't like animals when I was a kid, and if I wasn't afraid of animals as a kid, would I have been so significantly invested in saying, no, I have to become more comfortable with animals, and
mhm,
change my whole life, change my family's life, because my boys grew up alongside animals. So connecting the dots recognizes that as we move forward in the field, the collegiality, the interactions where we can all learn from each other. And so I use that word learn from each other because I still consider myself an active learner. I
mhm,
want to learn from different people and have that sense of community. I think that one of the things that I want people to understand, and if I could just do this by saying the word passion. My grandfather once said to me, "Make a life hobby." He used to call me hobby. Make a life hobby, not a living, and you'll be happy. And
mhm,
and he was right. As I look back at my career, um, I've learned to make a life in doing this. So you have to have the passion, and if we go full circle, as much as I talk about the scientific endeavors as the field grows, the sophistication, the competencies I want to see people gain to do this work, I want all the people to hear me say this. Although I'm a strong proponent of good research,
mhm.
I always want people to remember why we do this work and the value that animals provide our world. So, I shared a story of Sasha early on. I could share stories of children who never spoke, and
Mhm.
all of a sudden it was the golden retriever that nudged them enough to open up their words, open up their heart. I've had children that interacted with my birds who opened up enough to say that, when I was younger, I had this very hurtful experience. So to recognize how important the animals are in this work and to recognize their contributions is something that I want all of us to appreciate.
Mhm.
So never forget the past. The early years of this field are important. So mentorship, I believe, is an important responsibility, but mentorship can go both ways too. I
Yeah.
think newer people can still bring lots of good ideas here.
Absolutely. And so, whether you're joining us today and you are just interested in working with therapy animals, or if you've been doing this forever, this is an association you need to belong to. We need you to be a balanced group of professionals. We talk about standardizing and professionalizing the field. So, we need everyone to join. We need everyone to come together, share what you have. What you've learned, what you're hopeful for, questions that you may have, which leads really great into something that we're excited to announce today. So, this conversation with Dr. Fine has been so much fun, but we see more questions coming in that we don't have time for. And I hear so often, I need someone who's a sounding board who can help me work through what's happening with my animal in practice. So, we will be having a very exciting promotion. If you join by August 15th, the Association of Animal Assisted Intervention Professionals, you'll be invited to be a part of an exclusive cohort where you will have a series of group calls with me and Dr. Fine. You can ask questions, get some wisdom that is just invaluable. So you will be invited to be a part of that group if you join by August 15th, and we'll have some more leaders to join us in this series from different vocations so that you have access to these people who for so long have written textbooks, and maybe we go and hear them speak, but here's the time to have those one-on-one conversations and learn. Um, and if you joined yesterday, I see, yes, you are still eligible. If you've one of our first joiners, you'll still be invited. Um, and so I love that. I love people are excited to be a part of that group with you. Thank you so much. Anything else you want to say to everyone before we say goodbye today?
Just that it's an honor. I have been involved with pet partners for a long, long time, and um, I, I'm enthusiastic about where the field is going. I've talked about this for a long time that we needed a movement for the group of professionals to come together, um, to think through and problem solve how to advance the field. So it truly is an honor to be involved in the early part, and I want to encourage all of you to stay positive. And again, our role is to provide the best opportunity for our clients that happen to be human, but to recognize and appreciate the gifts and the blessings that animals have. And I have to say, like when we started off, and I talked about Sasha, and then I said I had this other big friend, which was a horse, who would think that I would use words friends, but these are animals that have really blessed my life, and not only blessed mine, but blessed so many that I have worked with. So it's an honor to meet all of you, even if it's virtual. But I hope that I get a chance to see some of you at some point. And if you have any other questions for me personally, if you send the note to Taylor, I promise you I'll write you back. So I
Yes.
wish you well. Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. We can't wait to grow together into the future. So this was a great first live. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, guys.